Chapter 4 Ruby. The Godswood was always so pretty. Trees and vines hugging each other as they did everything they could to suck up all the sun, forming a thick canopy of green that was speckled with thousands of pretty flowers in endless bloom. Petals and leaves would fall to the soft and spongy undergrowth in a constant cycle, as the air was thick with a billion competing scents. Some people apparently found the Godswood creepy. I suppose it was sort of like how some people felt super uncomfortable outdoors, or how others could feel claustrophobic inside some buildings. Agoraphobic, that was the word. Some people had adverse reactions to particular environments, so I could imagine a place like the Godswood would freak some people out. But it had always seemed nice and comfortable to me. A quiet place that smelled nice and had lots of pretty flowers. What more could you want? It was hardly a surprise that the Godswood was inside Winterfell's walls. If you were in a war, under siege, I would want somewhere nice to go and relax too. And I guess if you were religious, you would not want that stuff outside of the walls. Bran the Builder clearly had the right idea when he made this place. The rest of the castle was a bit of a hodgepodge mess. A lot of different styles and structures that clashed. But that was in part due to Winterfell being built up over thousands of years. She was beautiful in a messy way, something so many people put their love and care into, and the fact that I had made my own small changes gave me a fuzzy feeling. I slipped through the winding paths that the trees had left for us as the birds let out pretty calls. Likely complaints about some humans stomping about their home. Sorry birdies, I just need to borrow the Godswood for a little bit. I needed some degree of privacy for what I was up to, but the birds could watch if they wanted. I didn't mind. Birds tended to be less judgmental. Being labeled a witch meant that people would treat you super weird and inconsistently. Sometimes you got a job with some noble and a bunch of people would come to you to do stuff. And other times you just got killed by scared people. So anything that was sorta magic coded was best kept on the down low. I did not want people to come to me to have their fortunes told. I was not about that life. Being stabbed was also not something I was into. And I would have to make up stuff and get people super upset with me. If I tried to tell people, aura is not magic, aura is aura, they would just hear, blah blah blah, magic, magic, magic. That and learning I had magic would just give Catelyn another reason to hate me. Ugh. Now and then, brushes or branches would try to grab onto my stylish red cloak, but I was not in a rush, so I would just stop and tease the cloth out of the grabby plant's grip without hurting them, and continue on my way. The Godswood was an area of 3 acres, but not really, because it was in a funny shape, so it was a bit more than that actually. And it was also impossible to go through the wood in a straight line. You had to go where the trees wanted you to go, so it would often take quite some time to get through the wild growth. I stepped out of the winding forest paths and shaded my eyes from the brilliance of the sun, playing across a bone-white tree with blood-red leaves so brilliant it was as if the tree was burning in the light. No matter how the paths would change in the Godswood, or how wild it would become, you could always find the Grumpus. "Good morning, Grumpy!" I called out, annoying a raven that cawed at me as I skipped through the clearing around the big weirwood tree. All the other trees gave Grumpus space, meaning that the area around him was the biggest clearing in the wood. "Looking handsome today," I praised him as I strode up to the face carving into the tree and gave Grumpus a hug, taking care to avoid the blood-red sap leaking from his face. I was still not quite sure how the old gods' religion stuff worked, but it seemed like a good idea to be nice to the god trees. Never knew when they would turn out to be actual gods or something, but I always knew the universe was strange like that. "Sorry to bother you so early, but I need somewhere to practice. I'm sure you don't mind, do you?" I giggled and put down a basket onto his thick and winding roots. "Okie dokie. Breakfast ready, privacy achieved. Now, let's see how rusty I am." I was dressed casually, comfortable leggings and a long-sleeve blouse with a skirt and light petticoat reaching my knees. Sansa loved my petticoats and included them in some of her outfits, the thief. She was super pretty in them, however, so I forgave her. It was never too cold in the Godswood, so I did not have any of my cute fur jackets on over the top. I did have my steel toka boots on, however. I ain't going into a root-infested Godswood without ankle support. No sir. I walked into the biggest part of the clearing with the most flattish ground possible, and spread out my legs and planted my hands on my hips. Right. Yes. Aura semblance. I should do a warm-up first, actually. I began to run through a series of simple stretches to get the blood pumping. All the while, Mr. Raven moved from branch to branch to get a good look at what I was doing. Before long, I ran out of stretches and had to actually get on with what I was doing. My aura had been with me in this life as a tiny echo of what it once was before, but it had always been there, and it had been growing more over time. I closed my eyes and placed a hand on my chest, taking a deep and controlled breath as I took greater care to try to feel the power inside of me as it flowed through my body. It seemed easier than before, when I had experimented with my aura over the years. It was reacting more quickly and it seemed less stagnant. But it was still super hard to get a grasp on how powerful it was. Still less than before in my last life, but how much less? I wondered why exactly I was having such an easy time training my aura now, rather than all the times I had tried it before. I don't think there was anything that had changed recently, but something clearly had. Perhaps it was because I was almost 15? But I had been a lot more powerful when I was a lot younger in my first life. Could I be affecting how my aura was developing somehow? I did want to live a quiet and peaceful life, without everyone relying on me for everything and then blaming me when things went wrong because I had no idea what I was actually doing and no one would help me when I needed it! I clasped my hands together in order to stop them from shaking and took a deep breath to calm down. Aura and semblance practice. That is what I needed to focus on for now. This was going to be fun. I would make sure of it. I focused and felt a familiar feeling of my aura covering me like a protective blanket. I felt that super odd sensation of the temperature around my body becoming totally equalized. And even saw my aura seeping into my clothes slightly. I turned that off and opened my eyes. I would have to think of a way to measure out my aura power. Perhaps dropping rocks from a set height onto me until my aura broke? Wait, no, that was dangerous. It was so much easier to have a computer measure this stuff. Westeros was kinda lame with technology. I focused and let my body relax as I swayed forwards and backwards, as my arms hang at my sides, before I threw myself forwards. The world became indistinct around me as an unnatural momentum carried me forwards, with my legs playing across the ground in a desperate attempt to keep stable. An attempt that was foiled by an unexpectedly bumpy root in my path. In an instant, I was splayed out in a thorny bush, struggling to keep my eyes open as my aura threatened to give out. I shouted, my feet kicking up in the air as I tried to wiggle out of the bush and get my feet under me. I could feel the thorns scraping and poking, but resisted the urge to let my aura protect me. It was no good practicing if I used it all up on something like this. Okay, so the speed works. Ow. I untied my cloak and began the slow process of teasing it out of the poor bush that broke my fall, trying to do as little damage to the garment as possible. Thought that was going to be a bit beyond me at the moment. Amused as I stalked back to the starting place while tying my cloak back on. The raven was staring at me with his little beak agape, so I winked at him and put a finger to my lips with a sushing sound, before I was ready for more practice. Once back in my position, I relaxed and moved forwards again, more carefully this time, my feet skipping across the ground as I circled the weirwood tree in just a few seconds, leaping across the dark, mirrory pool that formed under Grumpus's branches, and staggering only slightly to reach my starting position. Dang, I was pretty slow. Well, comparatively anyway. I hopped in place to bleed off the excitement of going that fast, as blood-red petals covered Grumpus's roots, rapidly fading away into dust carried on the slight breeze that worked across thousands of weirwood leaves. I felt my tummy grumble and decided to take a break. stepping over to Grumpus and my basket and settling in on one of his comfier roots. Well, that worked out pretty well, I would say. It's nice to be able to use my speed again. Never know when you gotta go fast, you know? I glanced at Grumpus as I pulled out a beef and mustard sandwich from the basket wrapped in cloth, and dug in as I hummed, tapping my boots on his roots. Ah, mustardy. You know, I never used to like mustard that much, but when your pool of spices suddenly gets super small, you have to take what you can get. I washed down my sandwich with a water skin full of tasty, super duper minerally water. Winterfell being a water source with hot springs came with more than a few perks. With my sandwich finished, I reached into the basket and produced a precious and delicious treat. A spongy glazed honey cake. I held the precious baked goods in my hands and had to swallow to deal with all the saliva that filled my mouth as I opened my mouth with a loud "ah" before I bit down into the treat with a happy hum and a wiggle. So good! It's made up for there not being any chocolate chip cookies in Winterfell. There were a lot of food items from the first life in this world, so I was sure there had to be chocolate somewhere. But I had little doubt that I would have to go on a long and arduous adventure to bring the glory of chocolate to Westeros. I devoured my honey treat and cleared the crumbs of my clothes before washing everything down with the last of my water and getting up from my little food break. Well, I had to move on to my semblance now. If I did much more with my aura, I would not have enough of it to power my semblance after all. Next? Well, going full petal would be next. It was very difficult to tell just going fast, apart from using my speed to go full blob of rose petals. The easiest way to practice with that aspect of my semblance was to sort of relocate somewhere I could not see, but had seen before. I looked at Grumpus. He looked at me right back. You are somewhat obstacle-shaped. Besides, I actually knew there was a clear space on the other side of Mr. Grumpus, unlike the rest of the Godswood, where it was just a big tangle of trees and other plants. If I crash into you, I'm super sorry. But you are a big tree, so it will hurt me more than you anyway. Yeah. I assumed the stance, and let myself relax as I allowed my aura to flow through me, fully activating it because I did not fancy getting a Grumpus-inflicted concussion. I closed my eyes and visualized the clear space on the other side of Grumpus as I took a deep breath and threw myself forwards. 1,000 voices, screaming, crying, laughing, all suddenly silenced. I felt the world press down around me with incredible pressure as a million eyes turned to me. I could feel them even as there was no light to see. I felt myself soar through wet and cold, faster than I had ever moved in all my lives, until I staggered to regain my footing as bright lights bore down upon me. I staggered and felt my aura shatter as I fell to my knees and vomited, feeling an overwhelming sense of vertigo as my ears popped painfully from a change in pressure. I struggled to fill my lungs as I stared into my puke puddle for a while, tears running down my cheeks as I felt my stomach threaten to add more to the grossness in front of me. But the feeling slowly passed, and I carefully wiped the disgusting mess off my mouth and onto the mossy ground before I got to my feet and looked around. An angry, accusatory face glared at me from a bone-white, scraggly branched tree. I looked to my side as the tree grinned at me, blood-red sap oozing down his chin. Behind me, a tree silently sobbed, another was frowning, and another simply stared with no discernible expression at all. It was hot, unbearably so as I staggered in place, nausea and fatigue making the world hazy and indistinct, before I fell backwards onto the soft, loamy earth and felt my consciousness fade.